I didn't unlock it. That's the first thing I checked. Not the key, not the door. My memory. Because when I reached for the handle, it moved. Slightly. Too easily. Not fully open. Not unlocked. Just not completely closed. I froze. Then slowly, I let go. The handle returned. Almost. But not fully. I stared at it. Because that position, I knew it. It only happens right after unlocking. That exact point where the lock is just released, but the door hasn't opened yet. I stepped back, then said quietly, I didn't do that. The hallway stayed silent. Of course, it was just a door. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the key, looked at it. Still there. Unmoved. Unused. I checked the lock. No marks. No damage. No sign of use. And yet, the handle wasn't resting. It was held. In that exact position, I stepped closer again. Slower this time. More careful. And gently. I touched the handle. It moved. Just a little. Then stopped, exactly where it had been. I frowned. Then pressed, slightly. The door shifted. Barely. A small gap. Then stopped. I pulled back immediately. Closed it again. Fully. Or I thought I did. I stepped back. Watched. Waited. And slowly it returned. Not completely. Just slightly. That same position. That same almost open. I shook my head. Because now this wasn't a mistake. It wasn't memory. It wasn't force. It was repeating. Turned the key. This time intentionally. Felt the mechanism. The full motion. Click. Unlock. I opened the door. Stepped inside. Closed it. Locked it again. And waited. Nothing. For a moment. Everything felt normal. Still. Complete. Then slowly the handle moved. Not from me. Not from pressure. Just slightly. Into that same position. Halfway. I stared at it. Then said, quietly, you don't stay closed. The silence didn't respond, but the pattern stayed. I stepped back. Watched. Waited. Longer. Nothing changed. Just that position. That exact state. Not open. Not closed. I walked across the room. Turned away. Then turned back. Same. Unchanged. I approached again. Carefully. Placed my hand on the door. Not the handle. Just the surface. And pushed. Slightly. The door moved. More than before. A thin gap. I leaned closer. Looked through. And saw nothing unusual. Just the hallway. Normal. I stepped back. Closed it again. This time. Firmly. Waited. And again. Slowly. It shifted. Back. To that same position. I exhaled slowly. Because now I understood. Something simple. The door didn't stay closed. That it didn't stay open. It stayed. Just before opening, I looked at the key in my hand, then at the lock. Then said, when did you open? The question stayed. Because now I wasn't sure if I had already unlocked it and just didn't remember. Or if it was opening without me. I didn't try to fix it. Not at first. Because now it wasn't broken. It was consistent. I stood in front of the door, watching the handle. That exact position. Not fully down. Not fully still. Just held, like something had already happened. And I arrived after. I stepped closer. Slowly. Carefully. Then stopped. Because I noticed something new. The gap between the door and the frame. It was there, barely visible, but real. I hadn't opened it, and yet it wasn't fully closed. I reached out, touched the door, pushed slightly. It moved. Smooth. Easy. Like it was already unlocked. I froze, because I hadn't unlocked it. At least I didn't remember doing it. I stepped back, closed it again, firmly this time, pressed it into the frame, held it there, then released. And slowly it returned. That same position, that same gap, that same almost. I shook my head. Because now this wasn't just the handle. The door itself refused to stay closed. I looked at the lock. at the key dot, then said quietly, "Are you already open?" The silence didn't respond, but the thought stayed dot because now it felt like the lock wasn't locked, even when it was. I tested it dot, turned the key, locked it, felt the mechanism dot, solid dot, definite dot. I stepped back dot, waited dot, watched dot, and again. Slowly, the handle shifted dot, the gap returned. I stepped forward immediately, grabbed the handle, turned it. The door opened dot, no resistance. No click, already ready. I froze dot because now that meant something worse dot. The lock wasn't opening dot, it was already open. Before I touched it, I closed the door again, locked it. Then, without waiting, I tried to open it. Still locked. I stepped back. Waited dot, seconds passed. Then the shift, the handle dot, the gap. I stepped forward again. Opened it dot, unlocked dot again, dot, always the same. I exhaled slowly, because now this was clear dot, the door didn't open when I unlocked it dot, it opened later, or earlier, I couldn't tell. I stepped back further dot, sat down dot, still watching the door, and tried something else. I didn't touch it at all dot, did nothing. Just waited dot, and after a while it moved. On its own dot, slightly dot, into that position. I leaned forward dot, focused dot, and for the first time I noticed something subtle. It wasn't just the same movement dot, it wasn't identical. Each time slightly different. A different angle, a different gap, a different almost. I froze dot, then said quietly, "You're not repeating." The silence held, but the idea expanded. This wasn't one state dot, it was many dot, all close, all incomplete, all just before opening. I stepped closer again, looked at the door dot, then asked, "How many times have you already opened?" Because now I wasn't sure if I was seeing the same moment or different ones arriving before me. I stopped trying to be first dot, because now I understood something I never was. I stood in front of the door dot, watching the handle dot, that same position, that same almost. And for the first time, I didn't see it as something about to happen. I saw it as something that already had. I stepped closer dot, slowly dot, then stopped. Because now I had a different thought. What if I'm always late? The idea stayed dot, quiet dot, but heavy. I reached out dot, not to open it dot, just to touch it dot, and the moment my hand met the handle, it moved. Not because I turned it, because it was already finishing. I froze dot, then slowly let go dot, the handle returned dot, almost dot, back to that position. I stepped back dot, because now this wasn't anticipation dot, it was aftermath dot. I walked across the room, turned away, waited dot, then turned back. The handle already there. That same state dot, that same position, like I had just missed it again. I stepped forward, quickly, trying to catch it dot, to see it happen. But every time it was already there, already done, already just passed. I stopped dot, because now this wasn't timing dot, it was sequence. I wasn't watching it happen. I was arriving after it did. I leaned closer, studied the angle dot, the tension, the slight shift in the door, and something felt different dot, not the position. The meaning, I said quietly, "This is after." The silence didn't respond, but it felt right. I stepped back again, then tried something else. I closed my eyes dot, stood still, didn't move, didn't think dot, just waited dot, and after a moment I reached forward. Without looking, touched the handle dot, and this time I felt it dot, the movement dot, as it happened. Not before, not after dot, now dot. I opened my eyes. Immediately dot, the handle was moving, completing the turn dot, the door shifted. I froze dot, because that was new. I stepped back. The handle returned dot again, dot, almost dot. I exhaled slowly, because now I understood something else. I wasn't always late. I was just looking at the wrong moment. Stepped closer again, more careful this time. Didn't rush, didn't try to catch it. Just aligned dot, and slowly, I felt it again. That exact point dot where it moved, where it changed, where it opened, just before being open. I didn't touch it, didn't interfere, just stayed there dot, and for the first time, it didn't feel like I missed it. It felt like I was inside it dot that moment, that almost. I stepped back dot because now I realized something deeper dot the door wasn't opening, dot it was always in the moment of opening, and I was moving around it, trying to find where I fit. I looked at the handle dot, then quietly said, "You never finish." The silence held, but the truth stayed dot because now I understood. There was no fully open dot, no fully closed. Only that exact point, where it almost becomes something else, and never does. I didn't try to open it dot, not anymore, because now I understood something I hadn't before dot. There was no moment after, only this one. I stood in front of the door dot, still dot, watching the handle dot, that same angle, that same tension, that same incomplete state. And for the first time, I didn't see it as something unfinished. I saw it as something complete in its own way. I stepped closer dot, slowly dot, carefully dot, as if moving too quickly would break it dot, not the door dot. The moment I reached out, but didn't touch it. Held my hand just in front of the handle, close enough to feel it. And there, I noticed something new. A sensation dot, subtle dot, but real dot, like movement, not in the handle, but in the space around it. I froze dot, focused dot, the idea, breathed too deeply dot, and slowly I felt it. That exact shift, that exact moment where it begins to turn. Not visible yet, not finished, just starting. I whispered, "You're always happening." The silence didn't respond, but the feeling stayed. I moved my hand slightly, just a fraction closer. And the sensation changed dot, stronger dot, clearer dot, like I was moving into the motion, not watching it, not causing it, entering it. I stepped even closer dot, my fingers almost touching the handle. And this time, I saw it dot, not fully, not clearly, but enough. A slight shift. A beginning. Then it stopped dot, returned dot, back to that position. That same almost. I pulled my hand back, and immediately the feeling faded. I stepped back, looked at the door dot, then said quietly, "It only exists when I'm close." The idea settled. Not as a conclusion dot, as something observed. I tried again. Stepped forward dot, slowly dot, returned to that exact position. And again, the feeling came back. That motion, that beginning, that almost turning. I held my hand still, didn't touch, didn't move. And for a moment, it continued dot, slightly dot, further than before dot. Then dash stopped dot, returned. I exhaled slowly dot, because now this was clear dot, it wasn't repeating dot. It was responding dot, to proximity dot, to attention dot, to presence. I stepped back again, watched it settle dot, then tried something different. I turned away dot completely. Didn't look at the door dot, just stood there dot, listening dot, feeling dot. And after a moment, I sensed it again. Behind me, that same motion, that same beginning dot, but now dash stronger dot, longer dot. I turned back quickly, and for a split second, I saw it dot, the handle moving. Not already there dot, not after dot, during dot. I froze dot, because that was new. I stepped forward slowly. Didn't rush. Didn't try to grab it dot, just followed it dot. And this time, it didn't stop immediately dot. It held dot longer dot, closer to a full turn dot, then dash slowly dash, returned. Again, dot, to that same position dot, that same state. I stood there, breathing steady dot, then said quietly, "You don't stay there." The silence held, but the meaning shifted dot, it wasn't stuck dot, it wasn't looping dot, it was hovering dot, between states. I stepped closer again. Closer than before dot, close enough to touch. But I didn't. I just stayed there dot, inside that moment dot. And for the first time I realized Something else dot. It wasn't just the handle dot. The door itself felt the same dot, not closed dot, not open dot, just in transition. Constantly, I placed my hand on the door, not the handle dot, the surface dot, and gently I pushed dot just a fraction dot. The door moved dot slightly dot, and behind it something shifted. Not the hallway. Something else dot, faint dot, incomplete dot. I froze dot, then pulled back. The door returned. Normal got still dot. I stood there dot, then whispered, "It's not just a lock." Because now this wasn't about opening dot or closing dot. It was about that exact point where something becomes something else dot and never fully does. I looked at the handle, then at my hand dot, then asked, what happens if I stay there too long? The question remained dot because now I wasn't just observing it. I was getting closer to it dot, to that moment. And I didn't know if I could come back once I was fully inside it. I didn't step back this time. Not after that dot, because now stepping back felt like leaving something unfinished. And I had already seen what unfinished meant dot. It wasn't incomplete dot, it was where everything actually was. I stood in front of the door, closer than before, close enough to feel it, without touching dot the handle. That same angle, that same tension dot. But now it didn't feel like a position dot. It felt like movement held in place. I raised my hand dot slowly dot, carefully dot, and stopped just before touching it. Because now I understood something. If I touched it, I might finish it dot, and if I finished it, it would become something else. Dot fixed dot, defined dot, closed dot, or open dot, but no longer this. And this was where it existed. I held my hand there dot, close dot, close enough to feel the shift. And then it happened. Not suddenly, not clearly, but unmistakably. The handle dash moved dot, not after dot, not before dot, now dot. Didn't react, didn't grab it, didn't stop it. I just stayed dot, and for the first time, it didn't return immediately dot. It continued slightly dot further than before dot, then paused dot, held dot, not fully turned, but closer, closer to something final. I exhaled slowly, because now this was different dot. It wasn't repeating anymore dot, it was progressing. I stepped closer, just a fraction, and the movement followed. Not instantly dot, not forced, but connected, like it was responding to me dot, not my hand dot, my position dot, my presence. I whispered, "You're not ahead anymore." The silence didn't respond, but something changed, because now I wasn't arriving after it. I was inside it, that moment, that exact point where it turns. I moved my hand closer, just enough dot, and finally I touched it dot, gently dot, barely dot, and instead of finishing it slowed. The motion didn't complete dot, it expanded. I froze dot because now it didn't feel like a handle turning. It felt like time stretching dot. That moment almost was getting longer dot, wider dot, deeper dot. I kept my hand there, didn't push, didn't pull, just held contact dot, and slowly everything else faded. The hallway, the walls, the sound, even the door felt less solid, less defined dot, like it was all part of that same state. Not finished, not fixed, just becoming. I looked at the handle, or what remained of it dot, because now it wasn't clear. Edges soft, shape uncertain dot, still there, but not fully. I took a breath. And even that didn't feel complete, like it stopped right before finishing. I whispered, "This is it." Not a conclusion, a realization dot. This wasn't something leading somewhere. It was the place itself. The moment before dot, always dot, I stepped forward, without thinking, without deciding. And the door didn't open dot. It didn't need to, because I was already through dot, not physically, but in state dot. Everything around me felt like that same point. Every object slightly shifting, every space not fully formed, every movement never finishing. I turned, or tried to, but even that didn't fully happen dot. It stayed in between dot, And for the first time, I understood something final dot. There was no after. There was no open. There was no closed. Only that exact point where something is about to become something else and never does. I looked back, or thought I did, at where the door had been, but it wasn't there. Not fully. Just a suggestion. A shape. An idea of a door held in that same unfinished state. I lowered my hand, or almost did, and felt something settle. Not into place, but into stillness. A stillness that wasn't complete. Just paused. I closed my eyes, or almost did, and let everything remain. Unfinished. Unresolved. Unchanged. Because now I wasn't trying to reach the end. I was already where everything stops right before it becomes something else. And stays there. Forever.